Hello, my name's Catherine Cartwright. This is my upgrade presentation, which is going to tell you a bit about my research that I'm doing for my PhD at the University of Exeter and the University of West of England. I'm an artist and I often make work with communities. This is called participatory art. My research will be examining how participatory artists interact and engage with people affected by trauma. The title of my PhD is Examining How Participatory Artists Work with People Affected by Trauma, Co-Creating Portraits with Service Users of Devon Rape Crisis and Sexual Abuse Services. In this presentation, I will be introducing the research project, talking about the methods, considering the ethical challenges and threats that permeate the methodology and the research itself, and introducing some of the literatures I will be drawing from, including emotional geographies, geographies of atmosphere, and philosophies of ethics. Over the past 12 years as a participatory artist, I've come to understand a few things about trauma through the people I've worked with, and this PhD is my opportunity to dig deep into trauma and ask how my arts practice should shift or adapt in light of this research. For my PhD, I'll be running a participatory art project at Devon Rape Crisis and Sexual Abuse Services with their service users. My aim is to examine the relationship between participant and artist. In addition, I'll be conducting interviews with other artists about the dynamics between themselves and the people they work with who may be affected by trauma. Devon Rape Crisis is a vital partner in this research, and their role includes introducing the project to potential participants, supporting participants where needed, providing the space for our contact for where the art project is happening, and providing feedback on how the process is going. This will not be the first time I'm working in partnership with Devon Rape Crisis. I will be building on our relationship developed over the past 9 years, which was strengthened through an art project during my Masters in printmaking at the University of West of England. I will not have worked with or met any of the service users before, and none of the people supported by Devon Rape Crisis remain in violent relationships. They're all on a course of recovery. The support workers at Devon Rape Crisis will first assess which service users may be interested and pass their inquiries on to me. To help service users decide if they'd like to get involved, I've made a short video about what we'll be making in the art project. It's also a way for them to see me and get a sense of whether I'm someone they would like to work with. The art making. An introduction. I'll be talking about what we'll be making during the art project with Devon Rape Crisis service users. In the sample book, I've used myself as the subject. I propose that for this art project I will work one-to-one with service users to make together an artist book portrait. The artist book is a form of art inspired by book forms, but also takes it beyond the boundaries of the traditional codex form. It doesn't have to include text, it can be rather sculptural, and it could be purely visual. The artist books that we'll make together will combine portraits and text. The book form will be able to open out flat, as well as close up small like a book portable enough to fit in your pocket. The portraits of the service user will hold words, and the full meaning of these words is only revealed when the book is completely unfolded. The concept for the artist book portrait is directly inspired by what I've been learning about trauma and trauma recovery. The pages are stitched together in what is called a snake form, and I've chosen to use a snake form as a metaphor for trauma recovery. Trauma causes disorder and chaos. When the book is first opened, its pages fall and concertina into multiple directions, the book almost taking on a life of its own. But then, as it is lain down and opened out fully, the pages drift into a singular image, Like a map giving perspective and overview, the individual words come together to give a message from the service user to themselves. Remember, it will be their portrait, their self-portrait. An inspiring, hopeful message to return to, like a beloved letter or restorative poem one holds in your pocket or a bedside table drawer. To heal from trauma is to find some clarity from chaos and to be able to bear what were once unbearable feelings. I hope that the participants will choose the text they hold. It could be a poem, affirmation, song lyrics, could be their own words, but most importantly, they are uplifting words that reflect the hopefulness of recovery. Including words in the artist's book portrait is significant because trauma often manifests in speechlessness, and the words signify recovery and speak of growth and resilience. In the sample book, the words are a verse from a poem by Maya Angelou, which capture for me a cyclical, powerful hopefulness. I'm using 3 methods in my research. Interviews with artists. I'll be conducting interviews with artists who work with people in their practice, and I'll be starting these next month because the art project has been delayed. Interviews with participants of the art project. When the art project is finished, I'll undertake an interview with the participant, and these relaxed interviews will be an opportunity for them to recall and tell me their narrative and reflections of the art making process. And autoethnographic diary. This method enables me to reflect on my own behaviour during the art making project. I'll use this method to observe the emotions that arise, and my intention is to write notes directly after a session, methodically recalling from start to finish my internal emotional state. And the aim with this method is to analyse my position in the relationship between me as an artist and the participant. With the interviews with participatory artists, these are the questions. Can you tell me about a time you felt challenged or puzzled in how you should respond to a participant's behaviour? What do you know about trauma and how it affects people? And does your knowledge of trauma change the way you work with people? And lastly, how do you think the space or place that you work in affects the dynamics with the people you work with? And can you give me an example? Moving on to ethics. Questions of ethics permeate throughout the methodology and the practice in this research. I'll begin with the ethical threats in the methodology. Ensuring informed consent. The research participants are service users at Devon Rape Crisis, affected by trauma, their power betrayed by abuse. I need to be acutely aware of issues of autonomy and choice, and ensuring there is informed consent by reiterating their choice to withdraw at each of our 5 meetings. And alongside this, making it clear that if they want to withdraw, there is no impact on their support from Devon Rape Crisis. Emotional safety for the participant. The art project will take place at Devon Rape Crisis and will be in reach of a support worker at all times. In addition to approaching all contact sensitively, I'll be receiving training from Devon Rape Crisis on how to judge where participants may be starting to feel emotionally unsafe. Emotional safety for the researcher. Contagious or secondary trauma is a risk. Even though disclosure is not part of the art project, there remains a risk that as connection and trust grow, so may the potential for unasked for disclosure. To mitigate the risk of secondary trauma, there are several places for me to seek support, including the PGR Emotional Research Group, Wellbeing Services, fellow PhD students, and the staff at Devon Rape Crisis. As well as there being ethical concerns integral to my methodology, there are also ethical challenges that relate to participatory art practice that I'll be examining as part of my research. What are the ethical challenges as a participatory artist? Well, participatory artists work with people. They are as much our material as the inks and the paper we use. Dialogue on ethical participatory arts practice is becoming more frequent. My research specifically looks at trauma-informed ways of working. Ethics, the way artists interact and work with people, underpins this. Primary to ethical discussions in participatory art are around agency. Who holds the power, the artist or the participant? And can the relationship be truly equal? Creative choice versus clarity of process. Creativity is inherently open-ended, but the participants in this or any art project also need clarity. However, just as importantly, they also need to have creative agency, to be making their own decisions. So how do I respond to this tension? I feel I've come up with a framework for the artist book portrait that offers a clear plan for the way ahead but also allows for creative divergence. Depending on the individual I'm co-making with, I will respond to them and facilitate their ideas and suggestions. And although I've proposed a certain structure, format and material, there are many options within this. Most obviously are the words that are chosen or written, and another is the portraits. I plan to make 5 or 6 from which they can choose which to use, and these can also include portraits of their hands only and not just their face. Power and agency. The question of creative choices brings us to the overall ethical challenge of power and agency. This is key to my research, in which I'm examining the dynamics between myself and the participants. I want to find out where agency resides, because I think it's this question of power that underlies how participatory artists can work both effectively and ethically. So my research asks, what does the power balance look like between us, and how can I, as a participatory artist, promote their sense of agency? And these 2 questions underpin my main question, which is, what does a trauma-informed arts practice look like? Primary to becoming trauma-informed is learning about the character of trauma and how it manifests in our bodies, how it affects our emotions, and consequently, our behaviour. Our understanding of trauma has changed substantially in the last 20 or so years. In 1980, the American Psychiatric Association described traumatic events as outside the range of usual human experience. Today, author and trauma specialist Bessel van der Kolk declares that trauma is now our most urgent public health issue. And in acknowledging the commonplace nature of trauma, frontline services such as the police are looking at the way they operate and engage with people and changing to become trauma-informed. Because research shows that engaging with people more sensitively and with a focus on what has happened to them, rather than what behaviour they present now, has an effect on how effectively the service can be delivered. I'll be using geographies of trauma to understand more about how it affects and behaves in the body and in how we engage with other people. Understanding trauma, however, is difficult. It has a rather nebulous array of characteristics, and part of the problem of knowing trauma is the impossibility of knowing another's pain. To illustrate what I've learned about trauma so far, I've chosen artworks for each of the characteristics that I've drawn from geographies of trauma literature. Trauma is commonplace. Coddington and Misali-Vutinas state that trauma is commonplace because of the structural nature of our contemporary collective exposure to structures of violence. And Adams-Hutchinson asserts that trauma arrives in mundane and everyday places and moments in people's lives. Trauma is mobile. Coddington and Misali-Vutinas describe trauma as moving through the body, reverberating outwards like aftershocks. Trauma can be contagious. Coddington describes trauma as a contagion, an expansive process that binds the trauma of witnessing with the often unrelated life traumas of the advocate themselves, the stress of work or the hostility of friends and neighbours, the deaths of friends or other buried memories. Trauma is embodied, but hard to map in oneself and in others. Coddington says geographies of the traumatised psyche are fundamentally unmappable. And Adams-Hutchinson says Trauma lays in the body. It resides in the moods and moments that people often try to hide. Trauma fosters speechlessness and a loss of connection to oneself and to others. Speechlessness is symptomatic of this disconnection to the self and others, which epitomises the overall effect of trauma, which is to lose connection, first to the body and self, and second to others and the environment. Trauma makes one vulnerable, but open to growth and hopefulness. Adams Hutchinson affirms this, stating, "Trauma is embodied, not haunting with a ghostly and unwanted contingency, but with possibilities to connect with others in meaningful practices." What other literatures will I utilise in my research? Well, I'll be looking at emotional geographies in order to understand emotions in a spatial context, as well as how to read emotions, geographies of atmosphere, looking at the effect that atmosphere could have on the dynamics between the artist and the participant in my research, and also looking at staging atmospheres. How far is it possible to stage the atmosphere to affect the dynamics between artist and participant? And also philosophies of ethics, so ethics of the other, how to regard and interact with the other, how to be an ethical being. And I want to end with a quote from Mark Freeman's Priority of the Other, which encapsulates the tensions at play in ethical participatory arts practice. It is suggested that both centripetal and centrifugal forces are at work in the human condition. We are pulled both inward by the ego and outward by the other. While there is no getting around this play of forces, there may be a way of tipping the balance in favour of the priority of the other.